On this episode of WarDocs, we have the privilege of speaking with Navy Commander and preventive medicine physician Paul Chretien, who also serves as a Biological Technologies Office Program Manager at DARPA. Dr. Chretien sheds light on the global impact of preventive medicine, a field that plays a critical role in supporting the armed forces worldwide. He provides a brief overview of DARPA's mission and explains how it has evolved in the area of addressing medical challenges and advancing healthcare technologies. JP describes a current project in his portfolio that is aimed at creating a shelf-stable whole blood substitute that could revolutionize trauma care both on the battlefield and in the civilian trauma system. He also discusses another exciting DARPA initiative, the Triage Challenge, which consists of multiple diverse innovation teams to develop an autonomous technology to enhance response capability in mass casualty events. Find out more about Dr. Chretien and our previous guests on our website, wardocspodcast.com. And make sure you follow WarDocs on your preferred podcast platform and subscribe to our WarDocs YouTube channel. I'm your host, Dr. Doug Soderdahl, retired Army urologist.
Welcome to WarDocs, the military medicine podcast. This show brings you a first-hand, behind-the-scenes look into the mission, unique opportunities, and deployed experiences of the entire military healthcare team. From state-of-the-art hospitals in the United States to the most austere environments across the globe, WarDocs has you covered.
Today we're privileged to welcome Navy physician Commander Paul Chretien to WarDocs. JP, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for inviting me, Doug. I love the podcast, and it's an honor to be on.
Well, let's start off by sharing with our listeners about your pathway to becoming a physician in the Navy. How did you get started in that path?
I got started as an undergrad at the Naval Academy. It wasn't until about halfway through that I thought about medical school. Most people applying to the Naval Academy or the other service academies are not thinking about becoming a physician. I went through various phases thinking about what I might do as a naval officer. For a time, wanted to be a surface warfare officer. For a time, wanted to be an aviator. This was the Top Gun, the original Top Gun era. So a lot of people were interested in that. Went through a Navy SEAL phase. It was towards the end of my second year when I was a political science major that I started thinking about medical school, and there were a couple of influences there. One was probably a parental influence that had long been brewing, but that I'd been able to push aside until then. Both of my parents are physicians. My mom, an internist, trained in infectious diseases, but mostly practiced as a general internist, and got to see a different side of medicine with my dad, who was a surgeon, head and neck cancer surgeon, but research oriented. So for much of his career, he worked at the National Institutes of Health and ran a research lab there. So I got to see my mom on the practice side, taking care of individual patients, my father doing that as well, but also doing research and writing papers and influencing care for other patients through his work. So I'd always been determined to do something different, but eventually came around to medicine, and but viewed it from the beginning from a lens of policy and governments and public health. I was a political science major concentrating in international affairs. And so I looked at health and medical issues through that lens, was influenced by a book by Randy Schultz and the band Played On, describing the early days of AIDS, HIV and AIDS in the United States, and the policy failures that allowed that disease to spread. The Coming Plague, a book by Laurie Garrett around that time when I was in school in the mid 90s, that looked at AIDS and other emerging infectious diseases, and described how part of the reason why we're seeing new diseases emerging and disease showing up in different places was because of human activity and human decisions and human behavior, human caused environmental change and globalized travel and trade, and saying these problems are going to get worse. So these were some of the influences on me and the frame which I saw medical issues from. So from the start, I was interested in medicine from a public health and policy perspective, and so wanted to go to medical school to learn medical science and have a strong foundation in biology, and then go on to apply that knowledge in some form of public service.
Well, I mean, you got to jump right into it because after you finish medical school, you do your internship. Then all of a sudden, you are a coordinator in an overseas laboratory program that the DoD runs in global emerging infection surveillance and response. So tell us about those programs and those research labs and what you were doing there.
That sort of came out of the blue. I was a internal medicine intern at then the National Naval Medical Center, now Walter Reed, and was interested in preventive medicine residency. And so going on after a prelim year to do that residency, which is another 2 years, and so that's what I wanted to do. Is kind of a natural path for someone who's interested in a public health career. And I remember talking with the preventive medicine specialty leader at the time, and he said, "That's wonderful that you're interested in preventive medicine, but as a preventive medicine physician, your career is going to be a little bit different from a clinician, and so." In many assignments, you may not be caring for individual patients. You may be advising operational commanders and other leaders who have no medical background, but you may be advising them from a medical perspective. So you need to understand something about military operations, something how the DoD works in order to see medical issues in this broader context. In other words, you need to get out and do something else and then come back to residency and actually take a military assignment. So I was planning on being a general preventive medicine officer with the Marines, a battalion surgeon with the Marines. And then this assignment to a place which I didn't know about at the time came about. It's the, as you mentioned, it's DoD GEIS, the Department of Defense Global Emerging Infections Surveillance and Response System, which is now part of the Defense Health Agency. Back then, it was a fairly new activity under the Office of the Secretary of Defense for Health Affairs, and it was a fairly small program, small staff at a central hub based at the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research, and a budget of a few $1 million a year. And what it did was partnered primarily with other DoD medical research and development organizations, partnered with them and layered on top of their existing research infrastructure, layered capabilities to deal with emerging infectious diseases from an operational perspective, from a prevention and tracking and response perspective. So building on this robust infrastructure the DoD already has for medical research and development, and adding this more public health mission. And the reason that the program existed, in the late 90s, mid-late 90s, there was a lot of attention to the threat of emerging infectious diseases some of it by the book that I mentioned by Laurie Garrett. There were reports from the national academies looking at the growing threat of emerging diseases, and that got policymakers' attention, and that got the president's attention. So it was President Clinton who issued a national security directive that said essentially emerging infectious diseases are a national security threat, and it directed the executive branch, federal departments and agencies, to use their resources, look at the capabilities they have, and ask themselves, how can we help prepare the United States to deal with this threat? And since this was framed as national security, the Department of Defense was a very important part of this. And one of the many resources that the DoD brought to this challenge was this network of overseas medical research laboratories. Some of them date back to World War II. At the time that I worked with them, there were Navy labs in Peru and Egypt and Indonesia, and Army labs in Kenya and Thailand, satellite facilities in other countries in the area. And these were hosted by host countries. They were U.S. military commands, but they had a staff of U.S. military personnel and scientists, but actually mostly host country scientists, and they worked collaboratively to study diseases that were occurring in those areas. And so, these have been great assets for the military over time in studying things like malaria and dengue that are threats to deployed U.S. forces, but that we just don't have enough incidence of those diseases to conduct epidemiological studies and clinical trials in the United States. So that was the infrastructure we had. And so we worked with those laboratories, provided them additional funding to track the emergence and spread of diseases and to train host country scientists and host country public health people to be able to recognize disease outbreaks and respond to them. Because the idea was, in this hyper connected world and changing environmental conditions, an outbreak anywhere can spread anywhere else very quickly. And so we want to keep the United States safe by boosting up the capabilities of other countries to contain outbreaks. So really interesting assignment. And fantastic opportunity for someone interested in public health to go to these places and study diseases that otherwise wouldn't have seen firsthand in the United States, and also see the DoD medical capabilities in this global context, and understand what the DoD is doing not only for force health protection and national security, but how they're contributing to global health as well.
So I want to kind of fast forward a little bit to what you're currently doing. And you're currently a program manager in the Biological Technologies Office of DARPA, and that's Defense Advanced Research Project Agency. Can you provide a little bit of an overview of DARPA's mission and how that's evolved since it's been formed? And particularly maybe address the medical challenges and advancing healthcare technologies that DARPA is focused on currently.
Sure. DARPA was established in 1958. It was a response to the launch of Sputnik by the Soviet Union in the previous year, which was a surprise to the United States and the world that the Soviet Union had this capability. And so the idea behind DARPA was that DARPA should help the United States not be surprised by technology in the national security space, and in fact should do the innovation to create technological surprise. So DARPA's mission was and remains to make pivotal investments in breakthrough technologies for national security. So high risk, high reward research, which is not done at DARPA. We don't have laboratories at DARPA. We don't do this work directly, but we fund industry, we fund academic groups, we fund other organizations to do research that we hope will lead to groundbreaking technological innovations. And so, looking over DARPA's history, you can see examples of early investments that led to transformative technologies like the internet and stealth technology, GPS, DARPA investments were really important at very early stages of all of that work. DARPA has a number of technical offices, and one of them, as you mentioned, is the Biological Technologies Office, which is where I work. That's the newest office at DARPA, 10th anniversary this year, and it was established in recognition of the advances in biological sciences like genetic technology, neuroscience, immunology, and just seeing the potential for innovation in those areas to make significant contributions to health and military readiness. And part of it also is looking at how these technologies could be misused, or how they could produce consequences that we don't like. And so understanding these technologies and understanding how they could be used against the United States is something that's very important as well. So DARPA was doing work in biological sciences and medical science before the office was established, but this really recognized that biotechnology is just as important as the other technologies DARPA works on, and we need a core of expertise in DARPA that's working in this space. So the office actually was stood up by a military physician, an Army physician, Colonel Jeff Ling, MD, PhD, now retired. He had been working at DARPA, stood up the Biological Technologies Office, and set it on its initial path. You look at the office now, we have programs that fall into a couple of large categories, large areas. One of them is warfighter readiness. So this is the health and the readiness of the warfighters. This includes a number of medical programs and other programs to maintain readiness in different and challenging environments that service members may find themselves in. So that's one set of activities. And the other is really different, and this is biotechnology for other purposes, solving other problems that are not necessarily biological. So understanding the sorts of things that biology is good at, and harnessing that to make food, to make infrastructure, to repair infrastructure, to manufacture things in difficult environments, like even in space. So that's kind of a general breakout of our activities. And then running those activities, we have program managers like me, about a dozen people like me, who come in for tours of duty at DARPA. They come from the military, from other federal departments and agencies, national labs, universities, industry, and we serve typically between 2 to 4 years, and then we rotate out. So this is part of the operating system at DARPA. Is you don't get to stay long enough to get stale. So you come in, you have a limited period of time to develop ideas, win approval for them, get them going, and then probably hand them off to someone else when it's time to rotate out.
So how does somebody who's active duty, a medical professional, wind up working at DARPA? Are there official authorizations and slots in DARPA for military people, or how do they get there?
It's a little bit different for each person. And there aren't a lot of military people here at DARPA. It's mostly a civilian workforce, mostly a contract workforce. So many of those contractors are work in support of program managers. So we each have a team of scientists and technology experts, typically PhD level, who help, and we work as a team and develop programs. For military service members, there are a couple of opportunities. One is to come in as a program manager like me. The other is to come in under another activity called the Service Chief Fellowship, which I can describe. But for program managers, it's a couple of things. First is making contact with DARPA and starting the process. There is a process that any program manager goes through to come here, no matter where they come from, military or government, outside of government, and that is the organization gets to know you and gets to know what kind of ideas you're interested in and what kind of programs you might want to start and what kind of expertise you'll bring in and the expertise that's desirable at a particular time, that may change based on things that are happening in the world and with technology. And so making contact with DARPA and starting those conversations, and especially for a military person, making sure that you do that far ahead of when you'd actually want to come in, because that is a process that takes time to develop your ideas and typically culminates in coming into DARPA and giving a seminar, presenting a seminar to the other program managers about the sorts of things you'd like to work on, the ideas you have, and answering questions about them. It's typically a very, very interesting and friendly conversation. So there's that part of it. And then the other part of it for a military person is working with your service in parallel, so that if it works out from a DARPA standpoint that they'd love to have you, that your service is ready to figure out how to get you there, because there probably isn't a billet you can easily come into. There's no medical billet here. So it's working out arrangements, and this can take various forms, working out arrangements to get you to DARPA. But the best place to start all of that is probably to make contact with DARPA's military service liaisons. So we have senior officers at DARPA, representatives for the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Space Force, intelligence community, special operations community, and their job is to link DARPA with the community, link the community with DARPA. They're fantastic, and so if they know, hey, there's an Air Force doc who wants to come in, the Air Force liaison here is from an Air Force doc who wants to come to DARPA, then they can start laying the groundwork to make that happen. They can work with the service, they can work with the right offices at DARPA. So that's a good place to start. And also, as a military or recently retired military program manager at DARPA, I'm also happy to work with anyone who's interested in coming here and try to make the right connections for them, because we need military folks here. We need active duty medical folks here who bring an understanding of the needs in military medicine and have the networks and have the connections to facilitate programs. There's another way to work at DARPA, and that's as a service chief fellow. So this is a really fantastic program where people from the different military services come in for a much shorter rotation. So typically 3 months, but they get to work across all of the offices, all of the programs at DARPA. It's a wonderful experience. You can travel around the country, around the world, and learn about DARPA and bring that knowledge back to their subsequent military assignments. And sometimes those people come back. So there are two of us military folks in the biological technologies office. My colleague, Lieutenant Colonel Adam Willis, Air Force physician, neurointensivist. He was a service chief fellow a couple of years ago. He loved DARPA. DARPA loved him, and now he's back as a program manager.
So let's talk a little bit about what you're focusing on now. And I know one of the things we talked about before, when we had a conversation before this interview, you talked about shelf-stable blood substitutes under the fieldable solutions for hemorrhage with bioartificial resuscitation products. And I know we always have to have a cool acronym for everything we're studying, and that's F-sharp. But tell me how you got interested in this project, and what are you guys doing right now?
We do have some tortured acronyms, but the F-sharp program, which is developing this whole blood analog, is the first program that I proposed and was given the opportunity to stand up when I came in. And the goal is to develop a product that is as effective as whole blood in treating the severely bleeding patient, but that gets around some of the logistical challenges we have with stored blood. So we want donated blood needs to be kept cold, has limited shelf life. It's entirely dependent on donations. So when donations are down, as we've seen it during COVID in the United States and around the world, and that limits the blood supply in both the military and civilian side. So the F-Sharp product, the idea is a dried powder that can be stockpiled, sit on a shelf without cold for many months, and then when it's needed, could be rapidly reconstituted and delivered. And so we want a product that does the most important things that real blood does in resuscitation of the trauma patient. So we are evaluating it for its oxygen delivery functions, hemostatic functions, hemodynamic functions, and of course its safety. And then all of that is benchmarked against donated blood as the gold standard and preferred resuscitation fluid, and at the same time looking at the ability to manufacture this product. So we want it to have a manufacturing approach where we could surge production if a larger supply of whole blood analog is needed. Shelf stability, we want to see that it can sit on a shelf for many months and still be viable. So essentially, what this product is a combination of synthetic and biosynthetic mimics of blood components. So a red blood cell analog, platelet analog, freeze-dried plasma is part of this as well, and figuring out how to bring those together in a way that will approximate whole blood functionality. And so the idea for the product is not that this is going to replace blood donations, not going to replace the armed services blood program or walking blood banks, but this is something you can use when you don't have anything else available. We are in the second year. It's a 4-year program, and so the first year we worked on the product in vitro benchtop models. We're in animal models now, and we'll get to increasingly complex and realistic animal models later in the program. And then the plan would be if we're achieving our metrics and meeting our criteria, then we'd like to be able to then transition the product to a partner who would then go on and do the clinical studies. So it'd be fantastic if at the end of the program we could hand this off to a military research and development partner who would then do at least the initial clinical studies and go through that process. Typically, DARPA is earlier stage development of technologies, and so in the medical space, it's very unusual for DARPA to get into humans, to do the clinical studies. But instead, the idea is to figure out what the most risky part of technology development is, and just go at that with everything we've got, so we can de-risk further development and say, look, now this is much less risky to, in our case, conduct clinical trials for. So we have really a fantastic consortium working on this. It's led by the University of Maryland, but we have about a dozen universities and companies and research institutes that are part of that consortium, all working on a different part of it, whether it's different components of this combination, or the manufacturing, or the animal models, but working in an integrated way so that ultimately we have a single product. And we have DoD participation in this from the very beginning. And one example of that is we typically in many of our programs have a partner, a government partner, that will serve as the independent audit, the independent check, call it independent verification and validation, or IV&V, of the technology that our performers are developing. So in this case, we're working with the Navy Medical Research Unit in San Antonio. And so in parallel to all that work that this consortium is doing, they're also giving the product to our DoD colleagues in San Antonio, and they are conducting their own testing in parallel and looking at this from a military perspective, and making sure that this is going to be something that's relevant to military operational scenarios.
So one of the other things I thought was very interesting that we had discussed before was the DARPA Triage challenge, where you're looking for autonomous technologies to enhance response capabilities in mass casualty events. To me, that is a lot of potential. Tell us about that program and what you guys are trying to solve, and what is the problem, and what do you see as the implications both in the military and the civilian side?
I am very excited about this program. This is another one that I proposed. This is what you get to do here at DARPA. Get to propose these ideas, and then try to convince your colleagues and leadership that DARPA can invest in this, and then you have the ability to do things that that bring in interdisciplinary communities to solve hard problems. So DARPA Triage Challenge, I think, is a good example of those interdisciplinary approaches. So that's right. In the problem that we're working on in the Triage Challenge is a mass casualty situation, whether that's battlefield or natural disaster, large scale accident, attack on civilians, whatever it is, when you have a large number of casualties, and at least in those initial stages, not a lot of human responders on the scene yet to help. So what kind of technologies can we develop to enhance the capability of those initial responders? So we have different parts to the DARPA Triage Challenge and different technologies we're developing. One part of it is these autonomous robotic systems. So the idea here is, let's say you've got a really large scale mass casualty situation, big earthquake or large scale combat operation where you have many victims, and so probably some of those victims are going to be more urgent than others, and some of them will have immediately life-threatening injuries. And so the challenge here is, how do those few responders find those people and get them the care they need in time? And so the thought here was, well, what if you had small drones? What if you had ground robots that could on their own go out to the scene along with the first responders, or maybe even before? Maybe they could be deployed before responders even are able to get there, quickly survey the area, identify where the casualties are, and evaluate their medical status so they can relay that information back and to the responders in the form of, say, a map of the area. So here's where all the casualties are, and here's some medical information on all of them. And these are the ones that are most urgent that you may want to go to first. So it's decision support. It's not actually treating the casualties, but it's trying to improve the timeliness and the decision making of the responders. So the way these systems work is you have a robotic platform, and it's fitted with various types of sensors, standoff sensors, video camera, infrared, thermal, radar, audio capabilities. We've left it open to the teams that are participating in this to put together the sensor packages they want. And then at the core of this is the machine learning, artificial intelligence algorithms that are taking the feeds from those sensors, putting all that information together to say, this person has a severe bleed. This person's airway is in trouble. This person actually is only lightly injured, or whatever the case is. So it's really a sensor and an algorithm challenge. And we've done this as a competition, which is a little bit different from our typical programs. But DARPA in the past has had success with competitions in areas where it's just wide open. There's just so many potential ways of solving this problem that we would just like to open it up to innovators and see what they come up with, and know that they'll probably surprise us with something we didn't think about. So we had our first event, kind of a practice event, called it a workshop, last month in Georgia, a place called the Guardian Centers, where there's a lot of military and first responder emergency response training, a huge area where you've got buildings that have been collapsed, trains that have been wrecked, planes that are wrecked, cars that are wrecked, urban scenes, a little city that can be flooded. So great training location. And so we set up a mass casualty scene there with human actors who are acting according to a particular script based on their injury, who are made to look injured, the best we can, to fit their story, and mannequins as well. So doing the best we can without having humans that are actually injured. And then these teams come with their systems, and we see how they do. How quickly can they identify casualties as such? How quickly can they identify their injury patterns? And that all has to be done autonomously. So this isn't someone flying a drone and looking through its camera feed and deciding that someone is injured. These systems have to work on their own, process all of that on their own. So we'll have the first actual competition in October. So this was kind of a shakeout and a gear up for that. And then we have 2 more years in the program where we'll have a competition at the end of each year, and we have prizes for the best performing teams. But the hope, beyond that, is we want to move this technology forward. We want to call attention to the challenge of mass casualty situations. It's a problem that unfortunately we're seeing more frequently in civilian settings. We may have to deal with in military settings as well. And there hasn't been a lot of technological innovation in this space to help the first responders. So bringing attention to the problem as this becomes more and more public facing over time, and in our program, is an important goal as well. So that's part of the DARPA Triage Challenge. We have a couple other parts of it as well. We have a virtual version of that, a virtual platform to simulate all of this in a computer, so people can compete that way as well, and we can test things out there and then bring them to the real settings. And then we have another part of this, which we call the data challenge, where what we're trying to do here is improve clinicians' ability to predict the type of medical care that a trauma victim will need based on just on early post-injury data. And so we're working with University of Maryland Shock Trauma Center, University of Pittsburgh, providing high fidelity data on thousands of trauma patients, beginning in the helicopter through trauma bay, and then looking at the interventions they got and the outcomes. And we're opening that data up. Those institutions have allowed us to open that data to the research community to try to develop algorithms that could help clinicians predict, in a triage scenario, who needs to get on the medevac helicopter first, who needs to go to the trauma center, who's okay to wait here. and develop algorithms that would help those decisions.
Are there any that exist today that are being used that use artificial intelligence to make those predictions using whatever data you're getting from patients, or is that still kind of in the works and not ready for prime time yet?
There are algorithms that are used now. Algorithm in a broad sense, there are fairly simple heuristics almost that are used, functions of heart rate and blood pressure. There's also a more complex algorithm that was developed by the Army that just in the past few weeks was approved by the FDA to classify the severity of a patient's hemorrhage based on non-invasive signals. So there is interest in this area, and so what we're doing at DARPA is seeing that great work that's happening and saying, can we help push that forward? Can we build on that? Can we bring in different sensing modalities? So, for example, as part of our data collection, our performers are recording all of the data and laboratory tests that typically would be obtained in a trauma scenario, but bringing in other sensing modalities as well and seeing if that improves prediction capability. For example, University of Pittsburgh is installing cameras in their helicopters, and so that could provide additional information that also gives us a very good fix on when interventions occur, which sometimes is difficult to document, especially in a pre-hospital setting, but it's very important for the development of these algorithms, pupillometry, tissue oximetry, and other things as well, which are adding to the data collection, adding to the data set, and see how that improves the predictive capability.
How many teams of innovators are actually competing in this? And are they all from the United States, or is this an international thing?
We have 30 something teams that have qualified for this first year of the competition. It is quite a mix. We have US teams, we have international teams, we have teams from academic institutions, from companies. We have people for the at least for the parts of this that don't require a lot of physical hardware, like the data competition. We have people who've qualified and just kind of competing on their own as individuals. We're funding some of these teams, a minority of these teams. We had an open proposal process for people to tell us how they'd go about this, and we selected some of them for funding. But most of these teams have just come in on their own funding from other sources to be a part of it.
So one of the other interesting things that you've done in your career was you served as a senior policy advisor for biodefense at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. What would you say are the most significant outcomes of one of the reports that you were part of, which was the National Science and Technology Council report on using models for pandemic preparedness? And how did that contribute to what we're going to do for the future for forecasting and outbreak analysis?
Yeah, I was part of a sort of a policy relay team working on this idea. So the idea, which predated my involvement in this, is can we go about public health surveillance, especially for emerging infectious diseases and pandemic risks, in a more proactive instead of reactive kind of way? Can we predict how diseases are going to spread? And can we have that as an operational capability within the government? And so mathematical modeling, computer simulations, so that when an outbreak or when a pandemic is underway, have the ability as part of our public health system to quickly assess how it's spreading, who's most at risk, and where it's going to spread, who's going to be most impacted, and then most importantly, evaluate interventions. So instead of just coming out with a public health response and hoping that it works, can we test many different responses in silico and then come out with something that is more likely to succeed. So that is the general concept. And that's something that the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy had been working on for a bit. So when I was previous to that assignment, I was working at the Armed Forces Health Surveillance Center, and OSTP stood up an interagency working group to look at this, and is this feasible, and what's the state of the science, and I was interested in mathematical modeling and infectious diseases, something that I was working on in the Armed Forces Health Surveillance Center. So I had the opportunity to come in as part of that working group as a DoD representative, and then a co-chair of that group. And that group was led by someone who worked at the State Department and was detailed to OSTP for a few years, Andrew Hebler. So he finished his tour, and then someone else came in, a colleague named Dylan George from the Department of Health and Human Services. He'd been working on that in his agency, and then he came in on detail to OSTP, and so he and I worked together on it when I was in DoD, and he kind of crystallized this idea into not just the science behind this, but to an actual office within the government that would perform this activity, which didn't exist. And so an analogy he used was, when we have a hurricane, we don't ask academics who research hurricanes to drop what they're doing and help the government model how it's going to evolve and move. And we have people in the government who are doing that all the time. So could we have something like that for disease outbreaks? So he finished his tour at OSTP, and then the Navy detailed me to OSTP to advise on biodefense as part of that portfolio. Picked up this group, and so we had the opportunity to write an authoritative report under the National Science and Technology Council, signed off at the White House level, but brings in a consensus from all across the executive branch, the departments and agencies who have stake in this, which are many, and all saying, here are recommendations for scientific investment and for government capabilities and to advance this science. So it's a report. It doesn't provide resources, doesn't provide authorities, but what it does do is it provides ammunition to people in the federal government who want to start an initiative and want to make investments in this area. And when they're asked by their superiors, well, why do you want to do this? What's the justification? You can say, look, there's a consensus across the government that we need this, and so that can be really powerful. So then, you fast forward a few years, and this line of work that many people are a part of had this phenomenal policy outcome, which doesn't often happen, which is the standing up of a new office to do the thing that a lot of people wanted to see happen in the government. And so it's an office in the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. It's called the Center for Forecasting and Outbreak Analytics. It does all these things that I've just been describing, and it's led by Dylan George, who had really brought these ideas together when he worked in the White House. So like most policy accomplishments, it's a long time coming, and a lot of people worked on it, but this is one that did get over the finish line.
So one of the things that our listeners and viewers are curious about is, what do specific specialties do in a deployed environment? So you're preventive medicine doc, and you were deployed in support of the 2nd Marine Expeditionary Force as a chief of force health protection, and that was in Afghanistan. Tell us kind of what are the things that you would do, and what were the health issues that you were concerned about, and how does a preventive medicine doc make a difference in a deployed environment?
As soon as I found out what preventive medicine is, I knew that it was the path for me. As the name describes, it's about preventing problems, preventing illness and injury at both the level of the individual patient and at the community or the population level. So At the patient level, preventive medicine physicians learn about screening recommendations and vaccine requirements. Many of us at some point in our career worked in travel clinic for a few hours a week, where you meet with a typically a military service member who's going to travel abroad somewhere to do something as part of their official duties. And so you look at that person's medical record, you look at where they're going, you look at all the health risks there, and you come up with an individual plan for them, which may involve prophylactic medications, may involve vaccines that they need to get, and imparting knowledge about the environment and the risks that they'll face and where they can get medical care. But preventive medicine also works at the community and population and policy level. And that's why the role of a force health protection officer is a great one for a preventive medicine doc, because what you are doing typically is advising line commanders on what they can do to reduce health risks to their people, and help them be aware of the risks, and spot problems, and address them quickly. And these health risks. So this is basically everything outside of combat. So preventive medicine officers are working on what we call DNBI, disease and non-battle injury. And in most conflicts that the United States has been involved in, we've had more lost duty time, more morbidity, more medical evacuation for disease and non-battle injury than for combat injuries. And in the DNBI category, infectious diseases is always important, and also behavioral health types of issues as well. So it's the preventive medicine officer's job to help coordinate the activities, the preventive medicine units, the entomologists, the people looking at food and water safety, to coordinate those activities, and also to advise the commanders on things that they can do. And it's a very rewarding job for a preventive medicine doc. Prevention, outside of the military, sometimes is not valued as much in our healthcare system, but military leaders, line commanders, just intuitively and immediately get this, that you're advising them on things that they can do that will ensure that they have people who are healthy for the fight and healthy for the mission, and are as ready as they can be for the mission. And there's also a very clear path towards implementation of the things that you recommend, because if you can convince the commander that something is a good thing to do, then they issue the order, and it happens. And that's also kind of different from the way healthcare and public health works outside of the military. So when I was in Afghanistan, we had to think about infectious diseases. We had to think about the environment. We're in the southwestern part of the country, Regional Command Southwest, so mainly Helmand Province and neighboring Nimruz Province. And so heat injuries, especially during the summer months, incredibly hot. We had dust storms, and we had cold weather too. We had to think about the safety of food and water, especially since we had many people who were getting that outside of the operating bases where they were. We had a close partnership throughout the country, and especially in that region, with the Afghan National Security Forces, and worked with local populations. And there's also a coordination aspect of this as well. This was a coalition force. In Afghanistan, we had forces from a number of other countries, and coordinating all of these activities to the extent that we could across these other contingents. So it's a part of military operational medicine and combat medicine that maybe isn't as obvious from the outside. You think about the battle injuries, think about medevac. We had a system that worked incredibly well when I was in Afghanistan for getting to people who are injured and getting them up to initial care within a few minutes, and pretty seamlessly through the further echelons of care. But the disease and non-battle part of it, that is always a challenge, and it really requires support from the commander. So as a preventive medicine doc, you get to be the interface with senior leaders. I advised the commanding general, 2-star, subsequently 3-star general, and he was absolutely supportive of everything that we needed to do to keep his people healthy for the mission.
Yeah, it seems like the necessity only becomes obvious when you don't do it well. But when you do it well, then it seems like, well, hey, no one knows what we're doing, but behind the scenes, there's a lot of stuff going on.
It's central challenge of public health, right? You're doing your job and nothing happens. And then the risk is that the resources and support goes away because things are fine.
Right.
Yeah.
So what advice would you give to a younger military medicine professional who's interested in getting into this cutting edge medical research? What kind of advice would you give them?
I'd first say fantastic, because we need your preventive medicine expertise and your understanding of military operational environments in research and development. And so we need that perspective to help develop the technologies that are going to keep warfighters healthy and ready for their missions. So there are a number of ways to get involved in research. There are assignments that preventive medicine physicians can get at military research institutions, like the DoD overseas medical research laboratories, and at domestic labs like at the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research and the Navy Medical Research Center. Wherever you are, even if you're not at a research institution, say you're at a medical facility at an MTF, you may have the opportunity to hook up with research projects there. But the most important thing is to reach out, find the people who are doing the kinds of research that you're interested in. And even if they're in a different service, even if they're much more senior than you are, you should reach out to them and you should talk with them and understand how they've navigated their career, and ask some questions about how you can get involved. I've probably cold emailed someone at least once a week throughout my 20-year career. And I think the most interesting and meaningful opportunities I've had have come about through those sorts of relationships. So, you might be surprised how willing someone is, even if they're very senior and definitely are very busy. You'd be surprised how willing people will be to spend 30 minutes talking with you over coffee or on a virtual call, and impart some advice and help you navigate that path.
When the history books are written 50, 100 years from now, how would you want your legacy in military medicine, public health to be recorded?
I have a hard time thinking about legacy, but I would say that that if through the relationships with people that I've worked with and mentors, if I've been able to provide some advice or example that's been useful for them in going on through their military or medical or scientific careers, then I will think that was time well spent.
We've been speaking with Commander J.P. Chretien on WarDocs podcast. JP, thanks for sharing your experiences and insights with us. I thought it was just fascinating to hear about all of these things that are in your portfolio, and we wish you the best, because if we have a shelf-stable replacement for whole blood, that's a game changer. If we know how to triage in a mass cal situation when the human capacity is overwhelmed, that's another game changer. So thank you so much for sharing your stories, and thank you for your service to our nation.
Thank you very much, Doug, and thank you for yours. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you for listening to WarDocs. We sure hope you enjoyed it. WarDocs is a nonprofit organization supported by donations from listeners like you. Please follow and subscribe to our show on whatever platform you consume your podcasts, and rate and review this episode, and share the show with your contacts on social media. Find out more information about our show, our guests, and how to become a member of Team WarDocs on wardocspodcast.com. Thank you for your support. If you like war stories and medical drama, WarDocs has you covered. Spread the word.